I'm just going to say this 2025. Like if ChatGPT goes down, people lose their minds.
So in my mind, DevOps came out of an extension from the Agile movement, right?
What?
I can tell you what the problem is.
Go for it.
So the very first line of the Agile manifesto, we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's not to say that processes and tools aren't important, right? According to them, but individuals and interactions are the most important thing.
DevOps is absolutely still a mistake. There we go.
Welcome everyone, this is Michael Forrester with the Performant Professional. I'm here with two co-patriots around the discussion today. My friends Louis and Chris McNabb, both have been in the IT industry. So please introduce yourselves, gentlemen.
I am Chris McNabb. Have been around DevOps, system administration, SRE, what's called now platform engineering. Yeah, been around that for too many years.
Too many years, decades. Awesome.
Decades, that's right.
My
name is Louis Puster. I'm an Agilist, I would say, is probably what people would refer to me. I've been an Agile consultant, a team consultant, a business consultant. My focus is primarily around getting work done efficiently and building high-performing teams that help that work and enable a business to be both lean and successful. And that's what I've been focusing on for the better part of the last 15 plus years. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I'm Michael Forrester. I've been in DevOps for many decades. Like Chris, I mainly focus on the infrastructure pieces, although I have done a lot of leadership, organizational consulting, and whatnot. So we're here today to actually talk about DevOps. And I'm going to frame this up in a very specific way because I think it's 2025, and so there's a very interesting conversation to have about DevOps. And so, to frame this up, the general question I think we're going to discuss today is, was DevOps a mistake? Or kind of another thought is how even with instructions, DevOps seems to be kind of messed up. And we're going to talk about kind of some of the details there, but I'm going to start with probably first concept is how did we end up with DevOps Engineer as a title, right? Considering that every single anti-pattern for DevOps said, do not name your people or your teams DevOps. Let's hear it.
Because people don't listen.
When you say people, do you mean you people or those people or just people don't listen?
People in general. I don't know. In the beginning, DevOps wasn't. All the teams were looking at this movement and saying, you know what? Let's just rename it DevOps, or rename system administration to DevOps.
Right.
I think a lot of the smaller companies tended to kind of look at what the principles behind the DevOps movement was and try and implement that. But I think you had a lot of, fairly large corporations, not always large because I saw some smaller but lazy corporations doing it too. But where they just said, you know what? Oh, this new DevOps thing is cool. Let's just start doing that. And by start doing that, they had no clue what that really meant. And so they just ended up changing the names of their teams.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that people liked the idea enough that they wanted at least the title, if not the actual implementation?
I'm not so sure they liked the idea enough as it is that a lot of people in the industry tend to chase trends.
But I mean, they were willing to change titles, right? So there must have been an outcome there that they wanted.
So in my mind, DevOps came out of an extension from the Agile movement, right?
What?
So in 2001, right? The Agile manifesto was created. Before that, Agile work was happening. Scrum existed, extreme programming existing. All these things existed before the Agile manifesto. But the thing that was missing from the declaration was what happens downstream from these teams. And I think that the result of teams trying to move fast, trying to self-organize, may have left some of the operations people out of being able to operate that way. And I think that Gene Kim and the books around DevOps that sort of foundationally created the idea of what DevOps was, as far as the market was concerned, that was trying to extend that flexible, customer-focused, frictionless focus on continuous improvement, but as part of the operational chain, that was an extension of the Agile movement into all of the infrastructure that exists within software development. And I think, the industry had enough problems with trying to figure out, okay, well, in an Agile space, we don't have developers and testers and project managers. We now just have team members. And in most extreme cases where you had like mob programming and not like teams doing it, business people had real problems trying to understand how this all works. So they need to have some kind of structure that they can put into their HRIS system and say, this person has this title, which means that they have these functions within their system. And if they're trying to recruit people, they need buzzwords in order to be able to figure out, well, what do these people do, right? To simplify the language. That naturally leads to titles being created that are recognizable in the marketplace. And because of the DevOps Handbook and the Phoenix Project and books like that, it, I think, naturally gravitated towards the title becoming part of the job, right? From a necessity of being able to communicate the concept quickly without saying, well, you're an operations person that's supporting development teams and you're working in an environment where you're trying to create this system that allows for developers to quickly deliver code and blah, blah. So you don't have to have that long conversation. You can just say, you're a DevOps person, you're a DevOps engineer, you're a DevOps guy, you're a DevOps administrator, you're a DevOps, whatever, right? And that's I think, how we ended up there. The problem is, and I think this goes back to the point that you were trying to make at the beginning, Michael, people stopped at that high-level, abstract title, right? Once the HR people and the business people understood, oh, well, this is DevOps. The concepts and the desire to create better outcomes and all of that stuff was kind of misunderstood or lost.
Right.
And this is not new. We saw that with Agile too, because people are like, well, we're implementing Agile Scrum, right? No, you're implementing an Agile framework, which is called Scrum, and it has these specific rules, and these are the outcomes you should expect. And the business people don't understand that. They just say, higher velocity, we're delivering stuff faster. Great, do it, the thing. And that's where they landed. And so we saw a lot of failed implementations of Agile because people didn't understand really what was supposed to happen. And that has had really big impacts across the industry. And frankly, I mean, I think the change of the rebranding, the change that we're talking about with platform engineering is really just
DevOps, right?
Yeah, it's just the outcome that we saw from like Agile. I've heard people say Agile failed, right?
Yeah.
Nobody does Scrum anymore because Agile didn't work. Well, now we're rebranding DevOps into platform engineering for the same reason, because DevOps didn't work. And it's all because people didn't really follow the concepts of what DevOps was supposed to be.
Chris, you have several things.
I mean, you mentioned DevOps being kind of an extension of Agile. It absolutely was. That was the whole point, is the Agile movement started, right? The Agile manifesto came out. People started doing Agile. And that meant that product owners and product managers and developers got together. And everybody ignored going to production. So that's where the whole DevOps idea came from. And you're right, that basically people looked at this new idea and was like, oh, how do we implement that? And the easiest way was just change some titles, change some team names.
Well, what's interesting, though, is that, like, okay, so I don't know, and this is be an interesting question to hear each of you. My first encounter, actually, with DevOps, when I, like, really got that DevOps was a thing, wasn't the Velocity Conference in 2009. It was like 3 or 4 years later when Gene Kim and crew published the Phoenix Project. That was really the first time I knew about DevOps, but like cloud, it wasn't a thing until like a couple of years later, right after it launched. When I read the Phoenix Project, my first response was, this guy really gets me, right? Like this guy understands my problems, because I was reading about, Parts Unlimited and kind of the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, like this is my life that this guy's writing about, right? Immediately I was like, oh, this is a great idea. So at that point, no matter what he said, I was kind of sold on the idea. The funny thing is that I thought it would lead to technology outcomes. I thought maybe it might be a little process driven, right? But the big message there wasn't actually technology or process. It was like, talk to your people, which I felt like what Agile was trying to do to begin with. But that was my first encounter, was 2012, the Phoenix Project. I would love to know when you guys first encountered DevOps, like when you, as a thing.
For me, it was earlier than that. It was probably 2009 or 10, basically around when it started.
Yep.
Pretty much. I started hearing about it. There were some DevOps days being put on in Atlanta, and I started going to some of those. Initially, there was absolutely a lot of talk of, breaking down walls, talking to devs, talking to, the product owners. And this is as an operations person. Well, I guess technically I was still a developer then, but I was doing a lot of system administration stuff as well. But those DevOps days seemed to be more systems people than developers, although there was kind of a mix.
Right.
And, there was lots of talk, but when you are trying to put on, I think they did those DevOps days every month. So when you're trying to put on a mini conference every month, you run out of things to say, when really the thing you're saying is the same thing over and over, is talk to people.
Do the work, talk to people.
And so that's where, some of the technology parts of it came in. So, first it was configuration management tools, Puppet, Chef, things like that. And then it was, automation pipelines and whatever, but the tools ended up becoming the focus.
Yeah.
As with almost everything.
Yeah.
Right. Like Agile was completely taken over by Jira and all of those, the tools like it, right? Even Trello in the early days to try and make things, more agile. And then it gets bogged down in the administrative needs of the ticketing that is ultimately created. And I think this is, when people say Agile failed and they talk about DevOps being a mistake and they talk about all these things, again, we come back to the same problem, which is they're not paying attention to the real purpose behind these movements, the real purpose behind these movements of having a good feedback loop, being able to iterate in small chunks, being focused on continuous improvement, and talking to your customer, your team members, and the most important thing, which businesses, I think, keep failing at, which is give them an outcome you want, right? And you do this through product management, or you do this through engineering leadership, or you do this from the top level down. You give them a strategy, you tell them what the outcome is supposed to be, and then you empower the people who are doing the work to make the decisions on how you get there, right? And it's leadership's role to give you guardrails around, okay, we can't buy any new technology. You have to figure out with what you have, right? Or this is the budget that we have, or these are the technical constraints that we have as far as the hardware that we have. Like, those things need to be understood by the team so they don't go crazy. But it's about empowering the people to deliver the solution that you're trying to get to iteratively, and focusing on not who caused the problem, right? Because businesses are still doing that. Who is the problem? Who's the person who caused this problem, and fire that person, or get rid of this person, or sideline this person. But instead, why did we fail, and how can we not fail next week? Not next month, not next quarter, but next week, right? And that's the same thing with DevOps, right? The entire reason you have continuous integration is so that you can test it all the time.
Right.
And if it fails, you can quickly understand why it failed, because your batch size is so small that you can fix the problem, hopefully immediately, right?
Wouldn't that be nice?
And honestly, to answer your question, Michael, I, as a project manager, as an Agilist, as a person who's involved in the business side and working with development teams, working on that piece of it, right, that part that everyone failed at with the Agile movement, I didn't hear about DevOps until 2015, 2016, right? Because the operations people weren't talking to us.
Right.
They were like, We would send them the code and they would do their magic to get it on the servers, and that was it.
Right.
There wasn't any communication. So if those people I was working with knew about DevOps and were trying to do DevOps, they weren't communicating with us in that extended Agile framework, right? It wasn't until Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook came out that really popularized the idea that I think drove the conversation into the business strategy side, which is weird to me. I mean, why wouldn't you talk about it? Right.
Well, because I think somewhere, Chris, and pop in here after I say this, is that like I think somewhere there was this thought that operations had a bunch of concerns that affected the business, but the business didn't care about because it wasn't related, right? So like if we talk about even like things like non-functional requirements, like patching, updating, security, like the reliability pieces, it was interesting because oftentimes people will be like, well, we made this highly available, like we were working on some architecture or whatever. And it's like, well, did we ask the business if they needed that? And the answer would be like, well, no, why would we do that? We just know that they need it. It's like, well, isn't the business going to pay for this? And they're like, yeah, well, what if they don't care about having, backups over 2 days? It's like, why would they wouldn't care about backups over 2 days? It's like, well, they might not. Like, they might not want to pay for that. Like, it might be a risk that they're willing to tolerate for a period of time, and they might be okay with the loss of business. But it's like, you haven't even had the conversation with them. So it's interesting because there was this like watermark line where it was like, we're going to do the things that we know are right as engineers to take care of the business, but we're not going to actually let the business know that we're doing these things. So there's this whole swath of internal projects that would happen that never got surfaced to the business, and yet we're bottom line impacting to the business.
I would also say that just because there was a DevOps movement doesn't mean that all operations engineers, system administrators, or whatever wanted to have anything to do with it. Because in fact, there was a lot of resistance.
Louis has brought this up quite a bit as well. Keep going.
Various places that I have been. Younger people in the industry probably have never heard this, but there was a term, BOFH, Bastard Operator from Hell. And that was a source of pride to many system administrators.
What, to be like the resistant kind of IT guy?
Yep. To be the guy that's like, no, keep your hands out of my system. Don't change anything. It all works. Leave it alone.
Well, but that makes sense. And Louis, I would love to hear your take on this because you spoke about this many years ago. Why is it that operators were so resistant to change?
It's not just operators. Like, here's the thing: is that when you're doing business change consulting or agile consulting or anything, the thing you hear the most is, "Why would we change? This is the way we've always done things, right? Yeah. It works." And it's about changing context and pushing people out of their comfort zone. And the trouble that you have, especially with people who feel like what they're doing is successful, right? And they feel like the problem exists elsewhere within the organization. They want everyone else to change, but they don't feel like they need to, right? Even if all you're asking them to do is have a conversation with the rest of the organization to align with them. Because what you outlined just a second ago, Michael, is a complete lack of alignment.
Right.
Operations people operating in a bubble, doing things that the business doesn't know about, that they may not care about. There's a lack of alignment there. Why is that happening? Right. And again, we come back to the Agile movement, right? Talk to people, figure out what your customer actually needs, and deliver that iteratively. Because the thing that you didn't mention, Michael, is that in those days when this was very opaque and people who were running servers and handling the NOCs, the old NOCs that people had and all this other stuff, when that was happening, it was so opaque that there were projects that the business needs. In every business I've ever talked to, there were projects that the business needed that the people who were in those network operations centers and running those data centers, they knew were coming, but they had their own projects that they felt were higher priority, which meant that the business's needs would be delayed because of things that these operations people were hiding from the business. How does that make any sense? Right.
Yeah.
And this is where, I'm not going to talk about this as the solution to every problem. One of the things I really liked about the SAFE framework is that they brought operations into their communication, and they talked about when you're building software to bring in your DevOps team, your operations team, so that they're building a runway for your software ahead of schedule, right? So now it's part of your process right? It's not just part of your tooling. It's not just part of whatever. It's part of the process that you're supposed to follow, is this communication between operations people, developers, product managers, and even the business, right? You're building a strategy together that will hopefully drive success. The problem with SAFe is that often everything was a much bigger increment, right? It was bigger batches, which causes its own problems in and of itself. So how do we, if DevOps is ever going to be successful, right? Because we've talked about how people aren't following the instructions. They're just putting a title on it. If DevOps is ever going to be successful, how do we get the strategy of the business, the people writing the code and building the products, and the people who are shipping that code, putting it on servers and making sure that it's operational? How do we make that all one tiny increment? Yeah. Because that's the goal, right? How do we make that work?
Well, just to say this is that, Lou, I think you're standing right on, I think, the crux of anybody who's listening. I think if someone said, like, how do you define DevOps, right? Because it's like, we can talk about outcomes, which I think automation is one of the greatest outcomes that you can get, right, from DevOps, right? But I just want to say this, is that I was at the Velocity conference, and when Allspaw and Hammond got up there and started talking about Flickr's like 9 deploys a day in production, first of all, we had no idea the significance of that. Everybody who was there was just like, wow, that's super cool. We didn't know it was the start of a movement, because nobody had called it DevOps until I think like Dubois or somebody, Patrick, was like, hey, he tagged it on Twitter, and then they started DevOps Days, right? If I remember correctly. Like, that's how, 2009, that's how this went down, right? Yep. So when we were standing there, the one thing that was interesting, Louis, to affirm what you just said, also, no one on the Flickr team up there said, these are the technologies that really made this happen. It was all like, wait, you guys are dogs and they're cats, and you went over there and talked to the cats, and they were like, yeah, the cats and dogs like got together and we figured out how to like be on the same. We're just all mammals. We're just trying to figure out how to eat. And it was like, we were all standing there going, huh. Like this was like somehow like a novel idea that we were going to cross the Rubicon and have a conversation with the developers. What was funny, but the reason that was significant also is I think there was this kind of like mindset of like, well, we're trying to keep things stable and you keep changing things, right? And so there's almost like this inherent war of like, well, we don't want to change anything because we want to keep things up, and you guys want to change things because the business is telling you that features equal money, right? And so it was so funny, Louis, to your point where, and then additionally, we had all of these other shadow projects that we're running where we're like, we're going to keep reliability and backups and monitoring and blah, 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 all this stuff. And so what was funny, though, Louis, the core of all of that was that it was shocking that they were talking to each other. And it's funny because I think if we're talking about the title, like the title change, the injection of the title, because I used to blame recruiters for this, and I'm so sorry, recruiters. I think Chris is right. I don't think that you're responsible for this. I think the businesses came back and said, well, we would love for our people to talk to each other, so we're just going to change them into ambassadors, and then that's going to make that happen. But we're still running into the same problem, as a matter of fact. And I would love to hear your perspectives on this. I would argue that the increase of mobile phone social media consumption, doom scrolling, the increase of, like, even COVID, I think, had a really negative impact. We are interacting less with each other, has like a default mode than we ever have. And I'm talking about at least from a societal level, which I don't want to unpack. But what I want to say, do you think that has been a factor, and why we, in a sense, we are talking less to each other, and we might even be less skilled at it than we are before? Love to hear your opinions or perspectives on any of that.
Yeah, I don't want to talk to you about that. I'm just kidding.
I'm out. Forget it.
So, okay, before we get to that, I have one point that I want to make. You talked about the people were talking to each other, and that was the novel part of DevOps. That's actually in the Agile manifesto. Like, that's what it was. There was nothing in the Agile manifesto that left operations out. It was operations that left themselves out, or the business. Because the other problem is the idea, and I can't believe I'm about to defend the, resistant system administrators, but very often features equals business income. Right? They don't want to hear about anything else right up until something fails. And then stability is the only thing that matters for that outage period.
True.
And then as soon as it's fixed, that entire idea that things need to stay up is gone from most of the business.
But I mean, couldn't it be argued now that like the impact of reputation, which usually drives to revenue, stability is a major factor in that. Like if a service, like if I'm just going to say this 2025, like if ChatGPT goes down, people lose their minds, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's a factor, but like it's true for Facebook, like X, pick your thing, right? So do you think that's changed or has that stayed the same as it was 10 years ago?
I think it's gotten worse. I mean, me personally, if my personal internet, which it's not that important to me, like I'm not losing a bunch of money if it goes down, but when it goes down, I get pissed. Like it's 2025. Shit shouldn't go down. We know how to do this to keep it up.
Exactly. But do you think a company focus on reliability, do you think that's shifted, or is it still just the same kind of feast or famine kind of perspective, depending on whether it's up or down?
I mean, there are companies, I think, that see the value in reliability, and they definitely have, I think, benefited from that. I think one of the biggest ones, probably AWS, right?
Yeah.
They have pushed availability and reliability as one of the core pillars of engineering for a long time.
Yeah. So you think that's kind of the de facto. So then what are the issues now then? Because like in any company, we're still having the schism, right? We're still having the schism of, I mean, Louis and I, right, have done organization consulting. Chris, you've worked for a number of businesses, right? You've seen there's still this interesting schism, right, between the software engineering teams and the operations teams. So,
I mean, I can tell you what the problem is.
Go for it.
So, the very first line of the Agile manifesto, we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's not to say that processes and tools aren't important, right? According to them, but individuals and interactions are the most important thing. And that human connection and the connection to the need for the business and its customers is missing. And anytime you create tribalism within a group of people, you have different motivations, you have different agendas, you have different beliefs, and sometimes you create otherism, where the developers are other, and so their concerns aren't our concerns, and they don't matter, right? And I think, we talked about this at the beginning, the tools took over, right? Because people wanted to automate the parts that were hard, because that's the nature of engineers, is that they want to automate the things that are hard, and human interaction is hard. It's messy, it's inconsistent, it's unreliable sometimes, it's really difficult. But that's the reason why it's so important, right? Because the tools in the process, you can build them and then you can change them. They only work based on what you tell them.
Right.
People don't always do that, right? So the interactions between individuals, the communication, the alignment, that's what's important, and that's also what's hard. And you're right, Michael. We live in an age now where it's harder to talk to people and align with them because they don't want you to call them. They want you to text them. They want you to email them. They want something that's not going to interrupt what they have going on at that moment, right? And some of it's, they don't want you to bother them, and others, they don't, want to pull you into whatever they've got going on, whatever the reason. But that lack of communication and that lack of opportunity for alignment has created, in my mind, some more separation, which makes everything harder. And so I don't know what the answer is there. Because I think that this goes back. This is not just about COVID. This is not just about technology. This is about remote work too, right? People aren't sitting next to each other. They can't tap each other on the shoulder. But there's also massive advantages to being able to put your headphones on and focus and get work done, and also being able to work remotely and availability of the people and so on and so forth. But I think that finding ways to make all the work visible, including the technical debt, including the business strategy, including all of these things that the operations people have been hiding from the business traditionally because the business doesn't care about them, and figuring out how to build it into the plan for the business to move forward and grow, right? The business needs to continuously improve, not just the individuals, not just the teams, but the business needs to continuously improve. And if they don't have all the data, they can't make those decisions.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I think like when we talk about remote work, for example, remote workers are generally considered to be more productive and happy, like it's been studied, right? Several times over. I guess my question here is that, are they more aligned? Outside of productivity, outside of happiness, is there more alignment from like a distributed remote team? Like we know from the success of strongly distributed remote teams, like, pick your poison, right? Any of the high, like FANG level companies, like GitHub, for example, is highly distributed, right? Bought by Microsoft, really successful by any measure. And it's like, they seem to do well. So it's like, I think DevOps' intention, going back to the Agile, like we want these interactions, right? And these like people interactions over these processes and these tools. It's like somewhere I think DevOps was an attempt to kind of bring that concept down to DevOps so that these engineers, right, that were very isolated and just wanted to focus and they wanted stability, were able to come over and have those conversations. It's funny though, because our resistance to communication is stronger than it's ever been. And arguably at the pace that we're moving, we need it now more than ever. But it seems like the answer, which I think has been somewhere like a thread underneath all of this, is that everybody thinks, not just DevOps people, but technologists in general think that more automation will lead to more alignment. And even generative AI has been an extension of that. That's why platform engineering, which is a highly opinionated golden path for going from repo to production, is so attractive, because apparently you can now skip all the interaction with operations and just let operations maintain a platform. And now you've got this abstraction layer that you interact with. Thoughts?
Yes.
Chris, you had a reaction now.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, you said, you talk about alignment and that automation is going to improve alignment. And I think most people are confused about what they really mean with alignment, right? Because alignment within a business should be, these are the things we are trying to accomplish. These are the goals. Everybody understands those goals and everybody is working towards those goals.
Right.
That's alignment. I think a lot of times that's too vague, too hands off for most managers, honestly. They need to know that X, Y, and Z are happening in a particular order, by these times, whatever. Like they want a whole lot more than just alignment. And honestly, I know we weren't going to talk about AI, but a lot of the hype and push around using AI to develop more, in some ways, that's closer to actual DevOps and Agile than anything, because you are telling the agents what you want and they go and do it and you have no visibility into it.
Yeah, but also since they're probabilistic and not 100% deterministic, just like a human being, we don't always know that what we've asked for is what we're going to get, right?
Which means that the alignment of the agentic team is off.
Right, right. But I guess my point to that, and again, I don't want to talk about AI, we can do that another time, is that all the checks and balances that we've used with DevOps teams and product teams and engineering teams and are all still super applicable, probably more than usual even, because at least if a human being does it, it's typically either a miscommunication or a mistake, right? Like they didn't grok what you were saying, and so that was a mistake, or we might have said the wrong things. But
sometimes it's willful change because they think they know better, right?
Possibly. I can't disagree with that. But I just want to say this, Chris, is that you said at one point, you said, we want alignment, right? We want to align with the goals of the business, right? And that's the general idea. And dang it, you zeroed in on something in particular that I was like, oh yeah, that's actually like really genius. Dang, I can't remember the idea, but it was like basically like that when we're trying to build anything, ideally we are aligning with customer need, right? Like we are satisfying and solving some kind of customer problem.
Right.
The problem is that if we're resistant to communication and we think that automation and tooling is going to get us there, and whether it's an abstracted platform or whether it's AI or whatever, we are, instead of driving more towards being humanistic and trying to increase phone calls, and like, let's say that we still want to do remote work. I still want my 3D meeting room. right? Like
Oh, yeah.
a 3D meeting room would make a huge distinction in how face-to-face interactions went. Because if they were virtualized, it would still feel a little bit more face-to-face, even with a distributed system. But like instead of going deeper in that, we're actually going more towards automation. So oddly enough, it seems like DevOps is pushing towards more automation and less human interaction. Louis, you were going to say something?
I just laughing at the virtualization of the office, because I don't know if there's a product out there called Gather. I don't know if you've seen this.
I have. Yeah.
But you can create the office and your little avatar can run around and you can see when people are in meetings because they're in a meeting room and stuff like that. You can walk up to somebody's desk and if they're sitting there, that you can immediately start talking to them and it virtualizes the office. Like maybe that's the solution. But I think the real problem, of dealing with alignment is that everybody's got to get on the same page.
Right.
And it's hard because, again, people are difficult. And if people are resistant or they think they know better or they don't want to do something and they decide that they want to build a moat around their own work and create a fiefdom out of their department or what have you, it gets harder the bigger the business is. Right. And so I wonder, there's lots of talk with Agile and with DevOps too about how small teams that are focused and cross-functional can get work done. So I wonder if, we can build these big platforms. We can build these big pieces of software. Well, what if there were small teams that could deliver soup to nuts all the way even to production, that were a collective group that worked on certain subsets of applications, microservices or feature sets or, whatever, from the UI all the way down and delivering that stuff to production. And so now we have teams of teams that all can do the work. And now the teams have to coordinate with each other if there are dependencies. But if there aren't any dependencies, they can just ship code. And, to Chris's point, the middle managers are the ones that are often the problem because they're not in a place that really contributes value to the product. And their role is mostly supportive of the people in their teams or their disciplines, right? They're not a team leader normally that's helping to run the outcome. And so what does a manager do if they're not focused on outcomes? Well, what if we turned managers into effectively Scrum Masters for disciplines, not for teams, but their whole goal is to make sure that if they're a manager for developers, the developers aren't blocked, that they have the skills that they need, that there isn't a complaint, there's not a problem. They're handling some of the HR stuff, but they're also enabling the teams to move forward. And now we're talking about much more than DevOps. We're talking about complete business transformations where you are really digging into building a strategy together, right? And there's probably one person that decides that strategy, which is probably the CEO. This is what our business is. These are the markets we're going after. And this is how we're going to help our customers. And then they empower people below them to take care of their individual concerns. But at every level, those people have to be aligned if there's dependencies or tightness or of role connection or what have you. And all of the management structure, their job is not to review all their employees for performance and eject them from the organization if they are not doing what they should be doing and making strategic decisions in place of upper management. Instead, the managers are there to support the ecosystem of the business and make sure that the people have what they need to execute properly and to deliver on that value. And if there's a misalignment or a problem there, they need to figure out how to solve that, right? But that requires more interaction between teams. And again, now we have the same problem. The managers don't talk to people. They're not continuously improving their groups, their teams, they're part of the business. And so, I know we started this conversation about DevOps and why it's not working, but the fundamental reason that it's not working is individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
Right.
People not communicating, they're not aligned. And this isn't just to DevOps. This is the whole business.
Well, okay. But it is just DevOps because the whole point of DevOps is that it is the whole freaking business.
Well, that's because it's when people talk about DevOps, they're talking about Agile plus operations, right? And
right.
That's
dumb.
The developers are like, no, I'm not a DevOps guy. I'm a developer.
That's the mistake. Right.
Well,
but that's the whole point.
Yeah.
The beginning of DevOps, the developer absolutely is a DevOps person. The CEO is a DevOps person. The project manager is a DevOps person. All of them.
Because if we define DevOps right, at a certain level as removing any barriers that prevent the delivery of great software, particularly between developers and operations, but any team could be thrown in there, right? If we define it, that's the way I've typically defined it nowadays, is like anything that prevents the delivery of great software, that's what DevOps' job is to remove those barriers, usually through collaboration, right? And we could throw in automation and metrics and culture and all that in there, which I think is appropriate, right? But I guess the point being is that like it's like somewhere like everybody's an agilist, everybody's dev. Like the thought process is that these frameworks are intended to get us to talk to each other in own alignment with the business. Mm-hmm. Talk to each other, own alignment with the business. I feel like if you hit those two chops, if you got everybody to say it is our job to talk to the business to stay in alignment, and that's our job to talk to our people so that is continuing, right? And our people, by the way, is everybody. It's everybody's job to deliver great software that's in alignment with the business. Everybody's job. Then I feel like it's like when you're talking to the like security team, for example, and they're like, we can't deliver this software at all. And you're like, well, hold on. It's our job to actually deliver software for the business. And so like, what can we do to actually have that happen while still attending to your security concerns? And if the answer is like nothing, it's like, well, hold on. And I feel like that's where DevOps like kind of like into a larger degree, Agile takes hold, where it's like, well, hold on. We're both responsible. We get to say not right now, but we don't get to say no, especially if it's of value, right? Unless we're going to somehow hurt the business, and then it's a hard no. But it's like, otherwise it's like, let's have the conversations and figure out how we can work together, because I'm not here to push you over the edge and have you violate what you're supposed to do, and you're not supposed to do that to me either. Let's figure out how to talk to each other. I feel like if we could just get those two things of like, I need you to talk to the business continuously, I need you to talk to everybody involved in software delivery continuously. I figure like it's almost like the inverse T-shape, right? It's like I feel like we can just get that down, the whole industry would become radically transformed. And if we want to do automation for a lot of those pieces, I'm game. And so I can see the attractiveness of platform engineering, because they're like, well, these engineers don't want to talk to people. Let's just make them make a product that allows us to consume it to get to production. And then I don't have to talk to these guys at all. They don't have to talk to me. But the problem is that that's false thinking, isn't it, Louis? Platform.
There's one problem. If you're building a platform for your customer, you have to talk to them, which means that you have interactions with individuals, right? This comes back to that entire circle.
Yes.
I'm trying to eliminate the need to talk to these people, but I have to talk to them to figure out what they need so that I can serve them.
Right. So there's this weird illusion going on that somehow we don't have to talk to people anymore, but we're going to make a product that is entirely dependent on satisfying people.
The whole point of that should be that you want to serve your customer in a more fluid and faster way, right? So you could have platform engineers. I'm not against platform engineering. What I don't think should happen is you don't automate away your connection to the strategy, your connection to the teams you serve, your connection to the customer. That all has to be maintained. So as a platform engineer, you should be building a product that allows for you to do your job faster and better, but you're constantly iterating on it, improving it, and changing based on the needs of the business and your customer.
So who is the customer?
That was going to be my question, is because this is a thing that I have experienced at many different places with many different people. A lot of engineers have no clue who their customer is. And they're like, oh, well, I do internal stuff. I don't do any customer stuff. Yes, you do. Your customers are internal. And I think that's part of the problem. Like the whole platform engineering thing. I mean, I have had people trying to implement platform engineering, and I'm like, okay, who's your customer? What are you trying to solve? And they don't know.
So Louis and I were doing some organizational consulting recently, right? And I would be like, who's your customer? And Louis, just reflect some of the typical answers that we got from that question.
Well, I'll tell you the one that I specifically, I said, when you talk to your infrastructure teams, who do they believe their customer is? And they were like, I'm not sure. And I said, because in my experience, most infrastructure people, when you ask them who their customer is, they say it's them. That they're buying tools and building automations to make their job easier, so they're their own customer.
Right.
But that's not true.
Honestly, no, it's not. And that's a great question for the audience, right? What is your role and who's your customer?
Yeah.
Because I think there's people even Well, absolutely. Everybody in the company has a customer.
But I want to point out that
even the Scrum Master,
even the CEO has a customer.
That's right.
Well, but that one mind shift alone could have profound impact, because like I think many, by the way, having like now counseled multiple, even like creating a course on platform engineering, everyone seems to misunderstand that if you do not get the customer experience, and I would even argue the developer experience if it's for developers, right? You don't get that right, you're not running a platform. You're just like running cloud, right, with a bunch of infrastructure services. And so I just want to say this, though, is that I feel like we're kind of on this one thing that I think would actually re-energize and realign DevOps. Is everyone knew and aligned with who their customer was and what their needs were and talked to them. Like just became customer centric. Like I hear like companies, I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular, I almost did, right? Who are like, we're customer obsessed and they like hardly ever talk to their customer. I feel like if we just said, you know what, I have customers in my role, I need to identify who those customers are and how I can continue to align with their needs. I feel like that would be an amazing start to reactivating the whole concept behind DevOps and Agile, and even just like business satisfaction.
In a way, I almost feel like we need to change the conversation. That in order to achieve what we're trying to get, what Agile is trying to do, but they were, I mean, to be fair, the folks who built the Agile manifesto, they were just talking about software development. They had not brought in the idea of everything else. But I think that their concepts can speak to any part of the organization, right? And it's not about the tools, and it's not even necessarily about the process, but it is about making sure that you're aligned with your customer, you're delivering iteratively, you're able to respond to change, and everyone's working together towards the better goal. And I think there's a certification that businesses can get to make sure that they're a good business, a certified B corporation, right? Like that. There's a thing that you can do for that. I almost feel like someone needs to create a comprehensive checklist of if your business from top to bottom, CEO all the way down to the janitor, is operating in this framework, in this ideal, and these values, you can be a corporation, and like whatever it is, a DevOps. I'd remove DevOps, probably Agile, whatever it is, so that you're creating an environment where continuous improvement, communication, identifying and removing dependencies, like all of these things, being able to respond to change, reducing the batch sizes, working together, you verify that all these things are correct. And it doesn't matter what framework you're using. You can use Scrum, you can use Kanban, you can use DevOps, you can use platform engineering, you can use any of these things. The key fundamental pieces are what's important for that to exist. But the reason why I think a lot of these things change or these things fail is because of two reasons. And I'm going to talk about it, Michael. I'm going to talk about it. Here we go.
Go for it.
Two reasons. One, because the entire organization isn't bought into the change. And so there's a lot of people who you're not trying to change because they're outside of DevOps, they're outside of platform engineering, they're outside of software development, and they don't care. They just want their numbers, they want their outcomes, they want whatever, and they don't want to change necessarily, but you have no power or influence to modify their role or their interactions within the company. And that's unfortunate. And that tends to erode away these changes if they don't provide the positive change that people expect. And the second one is the dirty secret of the DevOps handbook. And that is when leadership changes or the champion of change leaves the organization, things tend to gravitate back towards the bad habits that existed before. And I think that that's because of the first thing I mentioned. If the entire organization hasn't transformed, that when the champion who's protecting these positive changes leaves or is disabled from being able to make those changes anymore because they've run into a roadblock that they can't overcome, then the overwhelming force of the old way of doing things, the people who hate the change, the people who are resistant, the people who don't want to continuously improve, the people who believe it's someone else's fault that this problem exists, those people will grind away at good progress until things are worse than they were when you started.
Yeah. Here. So then, Louis, just to check on that, then what you're saying, and recast this if it's inappropriate, is that the culture of the company and the influencers of the culture those two pit like the framework, like the rituals, the habits, the standards, the legends, the myths that a company has, and the people who strongly influence the change in those contexts. Like that's the part of the company that needs to be in alignment. Because, like, for example, if the company had a culture of true customer obsession, and we agreed not just on the value, but the rules of how we get there, which I think is equally important, by the way.
Yeah, agreed.
If we agree on that, and there's people who are constantly reinforcing of like, nope, we want to satisfy our customer. We're here to delight our customer. We're to stay aligned with the customer. What do they need? Let's talk to them. Let's stay in relationship with them. Let's stay active. It sounds like that's the advocacy that you're heading towards, is that alignment alone would create amazing ripples throughout the business.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to repeat, I'm going to stand on the shoulder of a giant here, right? I believe it was Peter Drucker, the godfather of management, of modern management, that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you do not have a culture that aligns with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, you will not succeed. It may not happen immediately, but it will eventually destroy your strategy. And so you have to have both the culture and the strategy to succeed.
Yeah. Okay, good. So it sounds like then, I mean, if like people were listening, if there was one thing, like, first of all, is DevOps dead? I wouldn't argue that I wouldn't argue that any of the frameworks are dead. I would say that we are probably under more duress than we've ever been about our ability to connect with each other. And if we talk about connecting with customers in particular, right, as a means of really aligning our business towards satisfying problems that people will pay for, that they will put attention on, then I would argue that probably the injection of a true culture of customer obsession and customer connection would probably be one of the biggest ways to activate DevOps and Agile in your environment. Anyone think there's something higher than that kind of obsession, that kind of culture of customer focus?
I mean, I think, alignment on whatever your goals are. If it's customer obsession, then it's customer obsession.
But I think that would be a great way to start. Does anyone think there's a better place?
Yeah, I think you have to in some way create an environment of continuous improvement and fearless feedback, right? Because you could be customer obsessed, but churn through people who make mistakes and create a toxic environment that no one wants to be in. Right. So you can be customer obsessed, and that's great. Right. That's going to help you get your outcomes. But if you want to change the culture inside your organization to get better success, you have to be working together, communicating openly, trusting each other. Because if you're not rowing the boat at the same beat as everyone else, if no one taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, let's fix this," right? Let's practice together. Let's get this done. Eventually, either you're going to get kicked off the team, or you're going to get blamed for the team losing.
Louis, that's great. That to me is a great segue into our next episode. So we'll save that for our next topic, which sounds like it needs to be attributes that need to be focused on for a great company culture.
Yeah. So What are we going to ask? What are we asking the audience? This probably needs to be.
I think we're asking,
but maybe we should finish up with asking the audience for feedback so that they can post comments, right? I know Chris asked one question, but
is that, first of all, based on what we said around DevOps, right? It doesn't sound like we're at least supposing that DevOps is dead. Where do you think that DevOps went wrong? That's what I would want to know in the comments. In addition, we are, supposing that to a certain degree, a certain amount of customer connection and communication is absolutely essential. Whether that customer is external, a peer, a manager, a coworker, like looking at people from a service perspective across all layers of the organization, including externally. I think that's the other supposition. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with it? I think that's what we're looking for. And then our next topic is going to be like, what have we seen both working in organizations and on organizations? What have we seen that makes the biggest difference about creating alignment and efficiency and effectiveness and productivity? All the things that we lionize while still creating a culture that attracts good talent and keeps them happy, right? And when I say talent, I mean people. So I think that's like the ask for the audience. So that's the end of our episode. Any other closing remarks before we go away?
DevOps is absolutely still a mistake. There we go.
All right, there we go. That was anything. Perfect. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Michael with Performant Pro. This is Chris. This is Louis. We'll see you next time.
See you.